everyone. So
Let's see. That's not the right tab.
that was nice, Mario.
Thank you.
Oh yes.
Da-na-na-na-na-na. 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 Let's see. Today's October 15th, right? Yep, that's our
Yep. I'm
stream.
surprised that stuff isn't sampled more often. Like Sonic the Hedgehog is sampled all the time, and I get why, but I mean, come on, you can sample some Mario.
All right, let me.
Type.
I will type your butt.
Clickety,
whoa.
clack. I don't know what that means. Type of my butt. What?
You know what it means.
It kind of sounds appealing, but it kind of doesn't sound appealing. It just kind of depends on the situation.
What if Colin were here to join in? All right, so
Yeah.
I have posted the link on the Twitters.
Oh yeah, but I can't see that.
I know. I'll put it in the private chat here.
And then I'll put it on the Facebooks, which I got to see if I even remember my login. Hold on. My Facebook account is linked to an old work email.
Oh yeah. Well, when I left EA, all of my shit was linked to email address EA. So I had to go through literally everything and change every single one to my Gmail. It was fun. I spent like most of a day doing that.
I'm leaving this one exactly where it is.
Because who I mean, I spent 14 years at EA. Who would have thought that I'd ever leave the company?
I wouldn't have thought you would have left the industry, but here we are.
Yeah.
Probably a wise decision. You ever miss it though?
Early on, you know what I miss? I missed EA Partners. I missed that particular group working with outside developers. But that group was gone by the time I left. I mean, there's a reason I went into the sort of central services area for a bit, is that didn't exist. They gave what was left of it to the group in the UK. And like no real logic to that decision, but they did it nonetheless. And so I don't think I could recreate what was great about that anywhere else anyway. So that's the long version. No, I don't regret it. I feel a lot better as an educator than I ever did as a video game maker, in the sense of like doing something that matters, if that makes sense.
Like, yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with making entertainment for people. That is, a thing that people can and should do. Just that I feel a lot better about my personal contributions to society this way, and I can mix games with education, which is super fun. So
yeah, that was part of my college major. Back in like the early 2000s was about education and games specifically, which is kind of cool. I mean, that's not what I meant to major in. It was just my major was more journalism, and I had to there had to be an education component, and I was like, technology and video games and education. I was ahead of my time, my friends, and it turns out it didn't go very far. But that's how that works.
Well, it certainly is actually a bigger thing in the tabletop space than it is in the video game space.
Yeah, I mean, it's big in the game space too. It's just not. You would have thought in a perfect scenario, depending on how you wanted to define that, it's a loaded term, that something like COVID and remote learning would really kick that up a notch, and it actually seemingly had the opposite effect. But hey, is what it is. All right, we are episode 203. You ready to roll?
I am.
Let's talk. Great start. Let's talk some Sharks hockey. All right. I don't have a water because we have some cleaners over and I'm locked out. Hello and welcome to Circling the Cup, San Jose Sharks podcast, episode number 203. Woo-wee! It is the first week. The first week of the Sharks season has actually been wrapped. This is the first week of arguably what you could call a new era. The Sharks have a lot of new players. They're seemingly going in a forward direction. Brody Brazil has new partners in Ted Ramey, and it sounds like Daddy, which is, by the way, a phenomenal replacement for Curtis Brown if you have to make one. But we're here to talk about the actual team, not Brody's partners. I'm Alex. Here with me, as always, is the Honorable Ben. What's up, Ben?
What do I do to be honorable? I don't get it.
I don't know either, but I've been doing it for so long that I just figure if I stop, the world will end, and I don't want that to happen. And unfortunately, not here with us this week because he's taking care of things in Sweden is Colin, but I'm sure he's got plenty of thoughts and will be yelling at the podcast as he listens to it. Ben,
Yes.
we started the season. The start of the season looked a little bit different from the preseason, as you would expect. Preseason is a different kind of hockey. The Sharks have lost their first 2 games. They lost the first game against the Vegas Golden Knights by a score of 4-1. Although they did come out kind of fun in that first period. Unfortunately, got to play more than that. And then they also lost. I'm going to say a closer game, but not really. To the Colorado Avalanche by a score of 2-1 in a shootout. And that one was only really close because of Mackenzie Blackwood. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Now, couple of things. This is going to be an observations podcast, obviously. I mean, it always is, but without going, in too deep detail for each game recap. Couple of things, that I've noticed. I want to see if you noticed them too. First off, even though neither of these are great results, and even though there are portions of the Sharks game that are just abysmal, I'm finding them a hell of a lot more fun to watch this season than last season. Last season for me, there were kind of like 2 things really that were going on that I found entertaining. One was obviously will he, won't he, Timo Meier, and the other one was kind of the same deal with Karlsson. But everything was really centered around those 2 players for the most part. We don't have those 2 players. We really don't have a lot of players to center things on, especially this first week because Couture's been out. He's still injured. There's Hurdle there, so you're kind of watching to see whether or not he can return to form after not wonderful season last season. But I just think things being spread out a little bit more is giving me more things to pay attention to. And I'm finding the team, even though they don't really want to play at all in their zone. I am finding them a little bit more entertaining. Now, some of that is because we're finally seeing guys like Eklund and Bordelot and Thrun who got an opportunity to start this week. I would say Eklund and Thrun seemingly made the team, period, with their preseason performance. I think Bordelot got a little bit of a lift with Couture being out, so he's really got to make the most of his time up here. But watching those 3 guys try to make things happen is fun. I know a lot of the other new Sharks, the Sharks aren't scoring, obviously, because they've scored 2 goals so far. But there are moments where they're getting like fast breaks and a couple of other things. And you can tell, that there are a lot of new players on this team. So one thing that you have to be mindful of is whether or not it's going to be a good team or a bad team. It is going to take some time for them to settle into each other, to really understand and be able to read each other. And then there's a system on top of that, right? So when you have this many new players coming in, there's going to be an adjustment period. It's obviously going to be the start of the season for us. We've got a pretty heavy start to the season. These are 2 really good teams we played. But I don't know. I'm finding it fun to watch. What about you?
I mean, I think so. I've got 2 thoughts directly off of your thoughts. First is that, I mean, the NHL has thrown the Sharks into the grinder. For the first something like 10 games, they're playing nothing but, teams that are expected to actually do something this year. And, in that sense, we deserve it.
And real quick before you get what Ben is talking about is our season start, okay, through October. So we just played the Knights. We just played the Avalanche. Next, we play the Carolina Hurricanes, who are odds-on favorites at the moment for the Stanley Cup. We have the Boston Bruins. We have the Nashville Predators. We have the Florida Panthers. And then we have back-to-backs between Tampa Bay Lightning, Carolina Hurricanes, and then we close the month with the Capitals. So to Ben's point, that is a meat grinder. Yeah. And the Sharks, again, full disclosure, not a great team.
No, terrible. And, to that point, kind of the disappointing thing I think has been that they aren't putting goals. So my second point here is that they probably should have scored more goals, except the passes are going to Luke Cunnan, who is terrible. And the Sharks, the sooner they figure out that shit, the better. Because there have been a number of really good scoring chances that have died on his inability to slap one time or even wrist on net. So Bordelot and Eklund, I think, have both been excellent in putting pucks into the crease, and then been very disappointed by the result, which is clank or whiff or whatever.
I agree. I agree. And well, that was the thing I noticed in that first period of the Vegas game is, for me, even the Sharks were not controlling possession. They were getting a lot of fast breaks. And when they got those fast breaks, they had a lot of really good opportunities. Like, they could have had a much higher score had, one of those bounces gone a little bit better. But I agree with you in terms of Luke Kunin. And, let's talk about Bordelot for a second, because this is going to be a hot topic between you and I based on our conversations. But between, I'm a big Bordelot fan, and I've been rooting for Bordelot since we first sort of saw him kind of come in. And I still feel the same way about him. I felt last year things took a little bit seemingly of a step back. When I say a step back, I'm not talking about like a leap back, right? You're talking about a player who's kind of on the border of making that NHL roster. And when he didn't have the same line mates of Gregor and I think Dahlin that he had sort of the year before, that trio to me looked great. Like, that was a lot of fun. His game wasn't as consistent, I think, outside of that. Now, him coming up here, he's got a huge opportunity with Couture out, obviously. When you get Bordelot in the offensive zone, I think he's very, very exciting. When you get Bordelot within about 6 feet of the net, regardless of whether it's the front of the net or the back of the net, I think he's got the potential to be electric. He scored a great tip in, bat down, I guess, against the Avalanche. But even in the first game, there were a number of times where he was in the right place, right time, great opportunity, made the most of it. Didn't go in. That happens sometimes. Goalie makes a save or something else gets tipped. My only thing with Bordelot, and I'm really hoping that they can work this out, is the same thing that I've sort of been saying. I said a little bit last season too, which is, between the different levels of hockey. Obviously, I know it seems like it's obvious, but for those who maybe think it's smaller than it is, the AHL game is not the NHL game, right? And we've been advocating for a long time, hey, if we want these kids to really get the experience they need, assuming that they're at least somewhat ready for that NHL, they don't have to be perfect. We should get them up there, especially right now when the rest of the team sucks, isn't really going anywhere. It's a prime opportunity for them to sort of learn at the right level. But when you go up those levels, in the NHL compared to let's just say the AHL, play is more aggressive. Play is a lot faster. Skill level is, obviously going to be higher. AHL, there's a lot of physicality. I'm not saying there isn't in the NHL, but you got a lot of guys that are just going around trying to hit. So it's a bit of a different game there, right? When you come up, there's always going to be a learning and adjustment period. Always. But the difference between the players who typically get to stay up in the NHL and the players that go back down to the AHL comes down to the quality of decision-making that they make. And a lot of times that's decision-making usually when under duress. And the thing with that is when you look at players who excel at the NHL level, one of the things that they are is typically they have a good sense of composure, and they're not, even if the game is moving faster, they're not necessarily rushing their decision making in ways that are going to put them in really bad situations. That they're making, even when they make mistakes, there's a percentage of risk with that mistake that they're taking, and those are the smaller risk ones. I'll give you an example of 2 players. One, Joe Thornton, way opposite end of the spectrum. I understand. But Joe Thornton, even when he came into the league, seemingly saw everything in slow motion, right? You are not going to rush him into making a move that the percentage of success or even risk wasn't wild, right? And I see the same thing with Eklund too, Ben. Eklund to me so far, he can get muscled off the puck a little bit, but Eklund's decision-making and composure in general, to me, already NHL level. I think if he continues down the path he's on, if we can continue keeping him here, I think he's going to develop into a really good player because he already shows that sign. Bordelot, to me, is a little bit of a hot and cold on that. So when I see him in that offensive zone most of the time, and again, especially around the net, he seems to make a lot of really great decisions, and he's great. What I've seen so far in the preseason, what I saw in these 2 games, a little bit more of the Vegas game, I think, for me, than the Colorado game, is the situation where he makes plays that at a 101 level, you need to know you can't make really at any level, let alone this level, because at this level specifically, it's going to screw you every time. And I'll give you an example of a play that he made. It was in the first period, and I apologize because I can't remember the other players who were around him, but the Sharks were struggling to get it out of their zone, as they were a lot in that game because of the space they're given, which I'll talk about later. The puck got pushed forward along the boards, the bottom side boards, right side boards, right, depending on how you're looking. It was about 2, maybe 3 feet away from the blue line. Sharks desperately needed to get out there. Bordeleau was engaged in a foot race. He did not have that big of a lead. We're talking like, almost neck and neck. He maybe has a foot on the other Vegas player. There are 2.5 acceptable things for Bordeleau to do in that situation, right? Now, it's clear he's under stress because he knows this player is going to catch up to him. He can, acceptable decision 1, he can hustle and try to take the puck out of the zone, even if he knows he's going to lose it once he's out of the zone, because if he gets it out of the zone, Vegas will have to reset. It lets the Sharks get back into position. Okay. That would have been acceptable. He probably would have lost that, about a foot outside of the line when he was in neutral zone, but at least it's out of the zone. Okay. The second good decision he could have made would have been to poke that puck forward and just get it across the line. Does he lose possession almost immediately in that scenario too? Yep. But again, out of the zone, players can reset a little bit. The 0.5 thing that I'll give him, which I would not recommend doing, is he very well could have, because he had the inside position, turned in, put the puck against the board, and then tried to jiggle and kick it out. Now, I'd prefer he get it out of the zone before he tries to sort of trap it or let other players kind of come over. But if he thinks the player's going to get ahead of him before he can get to that point, okay, then maybe. The decision that he makes, however, is on his offhand to do a no-look pass across the ice, not forward, mind you, across the ice. Now, here's the problem. The near Sharks player is all the way on the other side and really has no chance. The puck has no chance of even making it there. And as you would expect, that puck gets picked off and immediately turns into an opportunity on net. Now, in no situation is that the call you should be making at the NHL level, period. And you see that again occasionally. I think when I look at players like Weisblatt, one of my biggest problems with Weisblatt right now, especially watching him in the preseason, was as energetic as Weisblatt was, he would be pulling like 360 no-look spins up the middle, which is like hey man, you can never do that again here. Please, if you want to stay in the AHL for forever, go nuts. If you want to be an NHL player, you need to know that you can't be doing that. And I think that's what I'm seeing with Bordeleau is when Bordeleau makes a mistake, and he's going to make mistakes, about half the time those mistakes are 101. That can't be the mistake that you're making if you want to stay up. And if you listen to Quinn through the preseason and through these 2 games, Quinn sort of was pointing out that, hey, Bordeleau is doing this thing right and these things wrong. We need to see more of them. Fortunately, Bordeleau towards the end of there, and again, the Couture injury, I think, is benefiting him. Started to get that improving, but they got to stamp that out of him. And I don't think they do it by sending him down, because I don't think he has really anything to benefit in the AHL at all at this point. I think he needs to be up in the NHL, but we need him to get to that point where he's got that composure, where he's making better decisions. Because if he can, he's another one of the players I'm looking at that I go, he's going to end up being great. But he's not there yet for me. So that's not a condemnation of Bordeleau. Again, I like him a lot. It just seems like the quality of the mistakes he makes is really bad compared to other players who are just playing bad, which I know is going to be your argument, right?
No,
we have
not
a lot
entirely.
of bad players.
That's a little bit of it, but that's not entirely it.
Sure.
I think if Bordeleau was a 7-year vet, right, and made that pass, we would just laugh it off because he's a creative player who occasionally tries to do something he probably shouldn't. And we've seen that as long as you're 28 when you do that, nobody gives a shit. So Brent Burns made a career out of stupid passes, and
I always gave a shit.
Eric Carlson has made a career out of occasionally, giving up a 2-on-1. And so I think
but you're talking about real quick there. But you are talking about two players whose offensive upside is so clear and so established,
right? Well, do you
that
want
the
to
ratio works in the first.
Do you want to kill that offensive upside? Because the quickest way to
No.
do it is to try to clamp down on what makes Bordelot work to some extent. So, I guess my POV is I don't disagree with you that that's a bad pass, and somebody needs to reinforce what the right thing to do in that situation is, and Bordelot needs to listen and improve
Yes.
there. I definitely do not disagree with that. But I think if I were the coaching staff and I was trying to make this team better, the lowest priority to some extent is correcting a clear mistake like that, and the highest priority is to work your way through the guys who have no offensive upside and make those sorts of mistakes, like every D-man we have who ices the puck in the worst fucking situation. Because that is just as bad. Leaving tired dudes on the ice is just as bad as giving the puck away in your own zone. But it's not. It's never treated that way, right? Like,
no, I agree. But
so,
but I think what you need to be doing, and I said this last year, and I know you agreed with me last year, is like, if you're seeing that stuff from a guy like Bordelot, and if you're seeing that stuff from the defense, which we absolutely are, we're seeing it all over the place, obviously, then you really, 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 really need to be focusing those players on solid fundamentals, because those are fundamental things that need to be, corrected. I'm not saying take the creativity out of Bordelot. I will say this, and I saw this with almost all of the youth through the preseason and through camp. Someone's got to say, hey, man, no look passes in particular.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to work out as often as you think it is at this level. Because again, when you looked at guys like Weisblatt or some of the other youth, it seemed like they thought they could just fling it somewhere, Hail Mary, and there'd be someone there.
Specifically to Weisblatt, I mean, he just got a 3-game suspension for the way he plays. He is maybe one of the dumbest NHL players I've ever seen. Like, I think he's just dumb. I think he doesn't know any better. I don't think it's the same issue with Bordelot. I think Bordelot's hockey IQ is quite high, actually. Yeah. I just think that we don't know what prompted him to do that no-look pass. We don't know what he saw as he was spinning around, and maybe he thought, a guy was going to continue there, and they didn't, because maybe they were playing more defensively responsible than he expected them to.
Oh, that's cute. Defensively responsible with his roster.
I didn't say defensively good.
Is that the hill you want to die on?
I meant holding the zone as opposed to trying to blow the zone on that pass, right? Like maybe Bordelot expected whoever wasn't there to be there, right?
Yeah. But still not a high percentage play.
It's not great, and I think you're absolutely right. Bordelot should get the puck out of the zone. But I mean, it's not going to matter because the other team's going to take the puck right back into the zone, and the Sharks are going to be buried in there, and as they have been against both of these teams. So yeah, go ahead.
Can we talk about why they're getting buried too? Because to me, it is really straightforward. When I watch the Sharks right now in the defensive zone, and I'm not just talking about the defenders specifically, I'm talking about the entire effing roster.
Yeah.
I swear to God, Ben, it looks like they're giving every player on the opposite team about 8 feet. Like, they're not, watching Vegas in particular, that one for me, Vegas is not a team right now that you can really dick around with space. If you give them space, they're going to eat you for lunch, period. Right? You're giving them lanes to pass to. And if you go back and you watched that game, that was the real killer. Yeah, the Sharks needed a couple of pucks to go in. There were a couple of pucks that probably could have gone in. But for me, it was like you're giving this team and the Avalanche, you are giving them, every player is giving them so much space. It's like they've collapsed into the smallest box defense I've ever seen, like to the point where it's about the size of like a six-sided die. And it's like, you need to be pushed out further. You need to be cutting off that space, because hockey, much like soccer and a lot of other, sports of this nature, it's all about space, taking away space, making space. If you're not taking away space, you're giving those guys time, you're giving them possession, you're giving them lanes for shooting and passing. and they can't do that.
Yeah, I have felt, and I think there's a bunch of things that play into this, that the Sharks are playing very slow right now. Like, and I think a big part of that is, well, half of the team is new this year.
Yes, sure.
And I think so to that sense, or in that sense, I think part of it is they're just not familiar with each other yet.
Yes.
And that plays a role, I think, in them not being able to hold on to possession in the zone because they don't exactly have that sense of where guys are going to be,
right.
yet.
Yeah.
And then also guys aren't where they're supposed to be.
No, and you can see this, and this is a great point, Ben, because again, if you watch these two games, you will see moments where Sharks player gets the puck, turns, and then almost slams into the other Sharks player who is next to him because clearly they weren't quite confident in who was going to get that puck and where the next one should go. So I agree.
And then the other part I think that plays a role in this is that the defense is just so many bad players, and one guy last night, particularly, only one guy who can distribute the puck out of the zone, which is Benning.
Yeah.
And
Benning looked good last night.
Benning looked fantastic last night. He had an incredible game. In fact, I was defending him on Twitter, which puts me in a really difficult position because look, he was one of the better Sharks defensemen last year, but he makes such visibly obvious mistakes at times that it's just super frustrating because I think he could be, quite a solid, second pair defenseman on a better team. So there's that. Thrun obviously is the other guy who can distribute, and they decided to sit him, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I think they're trying to figure out their D pairs. They only have two righties, and they don't have a lot of options because Rutta, Burrows, they suck. A couple of those guys are not particularly good.
Can we hop back to the Thrun thing? Because I know I know obviously I'm a Thrun fan here, so you can disregard what I'll say, but I thought the guy played an all right game against Vegas, considering everyone else. He had an assist and a point, right? He's a -1. Yeah, sure, but that was really more, I didn't think that was him specifically. So I didn't understand the decision, especially with this roster, to then sit him the next game because, I mean, are they basically just going to use him and Nijov and that's it? And those two guys have to occupy the exact same space. It can't be someone else. It's not going to be Rutta. It's not going to be someone else because
to that point, it's very clear this coaching staff has favorites who are very bad players, right? Because you can hear Baldy sort of every game talk about those two guys in pregame as if they're actually good. So that's Cunnin and Burrows. Those guys are garbage, but they're sort of treated on the broadcast as if they're the best players ever, which they're not. I mean, they're garbage.
Right.
So yeah, I think that this is the thing we're gonna have to deal with. It sucks, but it comes down to Quinn not really knowing, who's actually good and who's not.
Right.
Which again, it sucks, right? Because Thrun needs to play. Bordeleau needs to play. Eklund's been great, so I don't think he's under threat of.
No, I don't think he is either.
I think Eklund absolutely looks like exactly what we would want him to be right now, which is a really smart young player who has become more physical than we maybe even expected. And protects the puck pretty well for his size and makes smart decisions in the offensive zone. I mean, he might be the only, besides Bordeleau, the only dangerous passer in that zone.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that, because this is something else that I noticed, especially in the first game. Eklund to me is little jumbo, right? Like he's a playmaker at the end of the day. I don't think he's going to be a sniper. I think he's a playmaker, and when you see him, I mean, he did a couple of teleportation level passes, like Joe Thornton would do in that game. But oddly enough, to me, it felt like the coaching staff is trying to have Hurdle be the playmaker. And for me, that's not who Hurdle is and not who we need Hurdle to be. Like that ought to be, again, Eklund, and I agree with you, Bordeleau as well. Hurdle's got to start getting pucks in net. He's got to be shooting more than he's passing here. And there's other players obviously that I think the coaching staff is expecting to do that as well. I think they expect Duclair to be more of a shooter. His shooting hasn't been phenomenal in these first two games. Hoffman as well.
I mean, Duclair's passing is terrible. So,
Yes.
he needs to be. One of the interesting things I noted on the power play yesterday was Duclair playing the point is
Yeah.
a terrible idea because he,
Yeah.
he doesn't have the passing touch.
No. Yeah.
He should be the guy who's up, standing in front of the goal.
Yes.
But I don't, there
Or at least
or on the
over
wing.
on the wing. Yeah, to cycle. Yeah, I totally agree. But that's the thing that I noticed about Hurdle was it seemed like Hurdle, and I don't know, maybe it's Hurdle putting it on himself. I'm not really sure what it is.
I think the team has been trying to turn Hurdle into that Jumbo Junior for like a couple years now, right?
Yeah, but that's
they've
not
had him play.
him.
Well, he's not. Ever since the knee injuries, he can't rely on his speed anymore, right?
Right.
He's never been the best shooter. He just, when he had his speed, he was able to kind of get in and dangle and fool goalies and occasionally snipe one.
He was also fearless then too, which I think is a little bit of it.
Yeah, but I don't think there is a natural fit for him, as either a shooter or a passer. So what do you do with that?
Good question.
He's not a top line center, but he's not a detriment, as a center, right? Particularly because what he can do is keep the play going, right? With his body and on the boards, he may not be able to do the passes you would want from the guy playing, QB behind the net, but what are you going to do? Like, at least he's not giving up the puck.
Maybe he's not a center.
Well, I mean, yeah, the Sharks don't have a ton of choice.
This has been an organizational issue when it comes to Hurdle's development forever.
I mean, neither is Couture. Couture's also more of a shooter than a passer. So, it just requires you to have some creativity in your offensive scheme and play, maybe Eklund, who's a winger, is more of your distributor. And Bordelot in the same sense. It's not like this would be the first time the Sharks have had a guy on the wing who prefers to pass. I mean, think about Ryan Clough as one example.
Right. Yeah.
When we were all begging Clough to get his ass in front of the net, he'd much rather sort of, kind of just work along the sideboards, the half boards. Anyway, all that is neither here nor there. I think it was surprising to me that it took an injury to Hoffman to get Eklund on the power play unit in the first place, because he's the only dangerous passer, that they have.
I was also surprised that it took a game for them to decide to put Eklund and Bordelot on the same.
Yeah. Well,
line. I mean, I get why from a paper logic perspective, but also from a actual play logic perspective, when you put those guys together, and again, you throw Thron in there as well. There's something about having that, at the same time that I gave a little bit of a criticism for Bordelot not playing smarter, necessarily knowing better at times. When you put three guys together like that who need to develop, it's kind of fun because those guys take. Maybe they take too many risks. Maybe some of those risks isn't good, but if you know to expect that from that line specifically, I think I'm a little bit more okay with it, I guess. But they haven't gotten the shit kicked out of them enough to be scared to be creative. And so what you're going to wind up with is probably one of the more creative lines.
Yeah.
Just because they're going to be trying stuff that guys like Duclair and Kunin.
They have capability. That's the thing, right? It's not just the fear. It's, to me, if they're the two guys with the most offensive upside on this team, period. Yeah. Mostly, I think, on the distribution side, not the scoring side.
Yep.
But that's why you have Duclair and Hoffman and you're taking a flyer on Granlund and so on and so forth, is because those guys are supposed to benefit from that passing.
Right.
I liked what I saw from Hoffman in the preseason.
Yeah.
And I think Hoffman is, probably the one guy that the Sharks brought in who they will be able to trade at the deadline for assets.
Hoffman's the tortoise and the hare thing. Yeah. He's going to be, you can tell that he's going to be steady. He might not necessarily light things up left and right, but he's going to be consistent, and consistency is part of what this roster needs, especially if they're going to be development player. The other player that I was really impressed with so far is I've liked Zadina quite a lot.
Zadina's been great.
I liked him I liked him a hell of a lot in the first game, not just because of the goal, but I mean, he almost had 2 or 3 there that he could have very easily. And then even in the Colorado game, where the Sharks thoroughly got outplayed despite the scoreline, I thought he looked good. And that's encouraging to me because, again, we have a roster full of players. And this goes to Blackwood too, which we'll talk about in a second. We have a roster full of players that the organization in this sort of semi limbo growth phase is sort of gambling with. These are guys that were supposed to be good. Something happened. Either they were injured, Blackwood, or the organization wasn't using them well, Zadina, or arguably Zetterlund. Are they gonna pan out? And to see Zadina, to me, I'm looking at Zadina right now. Small sample size. I get it, but I'm looking at him and looking at what he's doing both on and off the puck, and I'm going, okay, that gamble may pay off a bit. And then Blackwood, which again, this is an extremely small sample size. Don't go getting a sweater quite yet, folks. But last night he had like the game of his career. He had 52 saves. He looked excellent. Now, he hadn't looked excellent like that in the preseason at all. So kind of coming out of nowhere, but that is the goaltender that he was expected to be before he started having his injuries, right? So to see someone like Zadina kind of have that presence already in this small sample size first 2 games of actual hockey, not preseason hockey, that to me was really encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, I've liked some of what I've seen from pretty much everybody that the Sharks brought in this year or last year in the trade. Like I think Zetterlund has had his moments. I think Duclair has had his moments, though I'd like to see more. Jacob Peterson was fine last night. I mean, not particularly great, but he didn't play a lot either. The ones that I think haven't done very much at all are either, it's Cunnin for one example. Rutta is so bad. Oh my God.
Boy, he's slow too.
God,
Jesus. When they had him, when they had him paired in that first game with Thrun, I could sense Thrun's like youthful enthusiasm / inner frustration, because that was not a good pairing to me.
Yeah.
Like at all.
Well, I mean, Rutta just shouldn't be playing. I mean, that's your prototypical 7th D right there. He's old, slow, and bad. And what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, again, we get back to that question of what is the goal here? You have the worst defense core on paper that has been put together in the AHL for years. Like the big reason why the Sharks are picked to finish 30th or 32nd or whatever. I don't even know how many teams we have in this damn league anymore.
32.
There are 32 now. Great. Is that, you've got an obsession with these guys who never have been any good anywhere else, and you're playing them anyway. Also an obsession with continuing to think that Mario Ferraro belongs on NHL ice, which he does not. So that defensive core is historically bad on paper. And why play the worst? Thrun should be playing every game.
Yes.
Rutta should be sitting.
Vlasic's, other than, his injury yesterday, like the first game, Vlasic seemed fine.
Vlasic was good last year. I mean, he's at least, I think, figured out how to play, so he's not a huge net minus. And now, of course, he's hurt. So, maybe that's what opens up the opportunity for Thrun. But they well, yeah, I mean, he had a really good game at the AHL level yesterday, so why not? But I don't think so. I don't think they bring up. They've still got a Kudiak sitting there on IR. So I don't see them doing that. I think they're going to want Mukhamadullin to continue to play at the low.
I agree.
The low level.
Quinn made that pretty clear in the preseason that they liked what they saw from his game, but they thought he needed AHL time.
Yeah,
he said that in the post game interview.
Yeah, I was encouraged by one thing that that Quinn said after the first game, which it was what he said. You've got young players; they're going to make mistakes, and you just have to live with that to some extent. You give them opportunities, and I was like, "Yeah, baby." And then he sat Thrun, and I was like, "Oh, what the fuck?"
Yeah, and again, I didn't see what Thrun did to deserve that that seating. Let's talk about Blackwood for a second here, because in that second game, that second game score looked close, but it really wasn't a close game. I mean, the Sharks got absolutely shellacked there. They had 52 shots on goal. Their possession again was not particularly great. But the only thing that the Sharks did really well last game was their faceoff percentage was significantly higher than Colorado's, which is nice. Blackwood stood on his head. Now, it's been a long time since we've had a goaltender who really has been able to steal a game. Interestingly enough, when I was watching the Avalanche game, Ben, or not the Avalanche game, the Knights game, I initially thought that Kakkonen looked pretty good. His positioning was good. His movement was good. The third goal, he definitely should not have let in. That was the one where he sort of like flinched as opposed to actually trying to, really get in front of it. But I thought he looked all right. I thought he looked, a bit more confident than he did in the preseason, and towards the end of a little bit more like he was looking towards the end of last season, which was, all right, good, okay. Blackwood comes in here, right? And clearly, we traded for Blackwood because I don't think that the organization has the trust in Kakkonen. I don't think the organization really has trust in their goaltending pipe in general right now. But Blackwood was one of those gamble pickups of a guy who was looking like he was going to be really good, suffered some injuries, setbacks, and then just basically lost the opportunity with where he was. We bring him over. It's a die roll. Preseason, wasn't particularly impressed at all. Now, again, recognize the quality of play in front of him makes a big difference there. And preseason play is different. But he looked fantastic yesterday. The Sharks should not have been in this game, as far as I'm concerned. What was your take on his play?
On Blackwood's play?
Yeah.
I mean, he was great. I mean, he was lucky. But also he was, I couldn't point to anything where I felt like there were, what I was struck by a couple things. So when he should have been sealing the pipe, he was far better than guys we've seen, play in our crease in the past. There was a particular shot on net coming from the wings where he, on a quick pass where he was just fucking exactly where he needed to be filling that space. I was like, oh wow, that's nice to see, because you don't get that from Cock.
Right.
But it's so hard to evaluate a guy who manages to stop, 50 shots when so many of them are scrambly.
Yeah.
Right. Because any one of those could have just snuck through.
Yes.
I don't know. I think a game like yesterday, you're tempted to be like, wow, this guy is incredible. And
can't do that. Because it's too small. It's too small. Again, it's too small sample size. Like it was like look, are the Avalanche a good team? Yeah. Did he make those saves? Absolutely. Did he cover the puck in those? No. There were quite a few times where the Sharks defense actually did get there in time and move him out, which is great. It wasn't like he was swallowing up 52 shots.
Well, two goals were stopped or saved by defensemen. So Benning swept one off the line once, and so that helps.
Yeah.
Because it's a very different game if one of those sneaks through. Because he didn't stop it, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: if he can manage to, the San Jose Sharks goaltending problems the last, really since Martin Jones sort of fell off a cliff, has really just been consistency. So if, and again, a lot of that is influenced by the defense in front, right? If they're out of position, or if the Sharks are giving, again, 8 double wide lanes worth of space between themselves and the defense, especially against good teams, it makes it very difficult for the goaltender to be in the correct position all the time and make the save.
Yeah.
But if he can string together a bunch of these, then I'm a little bit more encouraged, because I do think what we need to start seeing from the Sharks is we do need to, at some point, be it one of these two on the NHL roster or someone below, really need to start to see someone rise up to be a starting goaltender and not just part of a double backup tandem. And I think that's what we don't know about Blackwood yet is he capable of being a starter, or is he kind of like Cock, a backup goalie who sort of hovers and sniffs around? Reimer was kind of the same way, right? Hover and sniff around, could put a performance up occasionally, but was not going to be able to do it across the entire season necessarily.
I mean, that was certainly his perception, but I would argue that Reimer showed over the last 2 years that he should have been a starter somewhere. That wasn't our spot, because I mean, he kept us in a lot of games that we had no right to be in last year. And I honestly, I think we've put ourselves in the same position with Blackwood. I think Blackwood's probably going to be that guy who can start and should start, and he's not going to be like, look, he's not fucking Tampa Bay's goalie whose name I cannot remember right now. Like he's not an elite starter. There's just no way he would have been starting by now if he was, and he didn't show it in preseason. And I don't know that he showed it here. This game was ugly, and anytime you end up facing 50 shots, anything can happen.
I will say, at the end of the day, he kept us in the game, which is what you want your goaltender to do.
Yeah.
But I would slow the rush to go get Blackwood sweaters. because I don't think you can look at one performance, and this performance in particular. I agree with you, Ben. It's not, was he playing well positionally? Yeah. Was he making saves? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Was he still giving up quite a few rebounds? Yeah, that's going to happen. Although if you're getting peppered with 52 shots, it's not going to go in your favor typically. But it is a feat for sure. It's something to immediately watch. It'll be interesting to see if they play him. I'm assuming they're going to play him the next game. I hope they don't just do every other game until they figure things out. I would go, hey, man, you just stopped 52 goals. Unless you're overly exhausted and don't think you can play, we're going to give you the next one, to see what this is about. But,
I mean, he should be playing. I mean, if you look at the first two performances and you're going to reward quality of play, you can't go back to Kokkonen. You have to stick with Blackwood until you've got a back-to-back.
Yeah.
And then you let Cock take the second half.
Yeah.
It was a vintage San Jose Sharks performance yesterday by the Colorado Avalanche. 50 shots on net and almost walked away with a loss. So, it's what I think part of that was Blackwood. I also think part of it was just that, not a lot of those shots were highest quality. But the Sharks deserve to lose. Let's just.
I was surprised by the shootout selection. Not a Barabanov. Yeah, that's fine. Eklund, sure. Hoffman wasn't the guy I'd put in that third spot personally. I probably would have looked more towards a Hurdle there or something. I know Hurdle isn't getting it in the net at the moment. I did notice that on that shootout, I felt like all the Sharks have been talking and said, hey, do wide lackadaisical S-turns before you get to the shot point. If you watch a slow motion of Eklund, it's particularly funny because he has like one hand on his stick as he's sort of like leisurely, skating all the way from one side to the other side. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I didn't think the Sharks were going to win this game in the get-go. I certainly didn't think it was going to be this close, especially not after the way that they had sort of played in the defensive zone against Vegas. So I guess I was pleasantly surprised, but I think that there's a lot of luck in there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like we've probably said a billion times over the many years we've been doing this podcast, the NHL, hockey as a sport, has sort of more luck involved in outcomes than any other sport. It's just the way things are. The puck rolls and bounces on the ice in ways that you can never expect. That affects shots. It affects the goalie's ability to sort of react to shots.
There's good parity. There's good parity too. So even like, don't get me wrong, Sharks are a bad team. But if you look at like hockey compared to like the NFL, where there are teams that probably shouldn't even be in the league, the disparity isn't quite as large there, and that plays a factor into that coin toss too, because any given night those teams can be almost even, right? It just kind of depends.
I mean, there's a reason why the best regular season team doesn't win the Stanley Cup very often, and it's not that they are suddenly bad teams. It's that they run into bad luck or hot goalie or some combination of those things, right? Like you have a bad string of games in the regular season. Doesn't matter. You have that bad string of games in the playoffs, and you're sitting out of them very quickly. It's just the way things are. And as Sharks fans, we've certainly felt that as much as any team.
Yeah.
So,
well, here's hoping the Sharks figure out possession, because so far that's the thing in the first two games that I really haven't seen at all. They do, again, why I think I find this team fun compared to last year is I do feel like they're good on a fast break, and they seem to be getting quite a bit of those because they're not really holding on to the puck for long periods of time. But again, I think as we started this podcast, Ben, this team needs time to settle down. They need time to get to know one another and how to play. This is not a season that we expect them to go anywhere, so they do have the time to do that. And I think what we're going to continue to watch is the new players' development, whether they are older and whether or not they can kind of reclaim enough to be trade bait, or whether they're younger and getting the experience that they need and gradually getting better. If you get Bortolo to that point where he's making less and less of those high risk dumb decisions, you all of a sudden have a pretty good NHLer on your hands. If you can have Zadina, continue to play well and play better. If you can get Zetterlund to actually get a puck in the net at some point in time, all of a sudden you start to have more and more pieces that when you bring in Musty, who seems like he's going to be NHL ready, barring setbacks, in pretty short order, not this season, but he looked great in the preseason. And guys like Smith, who may be a 1 year of college and then over, a part of what you're hoping for is that these young guys that we are really heavily betting on, like the Smiths and the Eklunds, progress quickly. But you still need a supporting cast. You still need four lines. And if you don't believe us that you need four lines, why don't you take a look at the Edmonton Oilers, who, that's a team who they have some elite players, obviously. Guys like McDavid is, obviously way up there, but they don't have four lines worth of players. And they didn't address that in the offseason very much. And what you're seeing now with their, was it like 8-1, just complete meltdown, is that like, that is not a complete team. And so even though guys like McDavid can carry a lot of the team on their back, he's not on the ice the entire time, right? So we need some of these filler players to continue to get to the point where they are going to be steady, stable, good support for these other players. And again, I think going back to what we were saying with Mike Hoffman, slow and steady, right? Like, it's not offending you on either side. I mean, it might be offending you if you're Carlson's wife, but not like in general, he's steady. He can be relied upon. So the Sharks need a mix of that. And they do have a couple of young pieces they were able to bring in who could serve that purpose. And that's what I'm watching for in these early games. And I'm assuming you are too.
I mean, the first 10 games are really what you need to let happen before you can make any big sort of, I think, judgment calls on guys, right? Like, that's just sample size is one thing, but also like it takes time for a team, even with preseason having been a thing, for them to get used to each other on the ice and start to get a sense of, when I'm here, that guy will definitely be here, so I can pass it around the boards or whatever. Look, the main issue for the Sharks, and the reason they're going to be stuck in their own zone all year, is they just don't have any back end talent on the playing on the defensive side. They've got two guys again who can distribute the puck in that defensive core right now, and they sat one of them. So if you can't get pucks out of your own zone with control, or even get possession of the pucks in the first place in your own zone, which is also a big problem for the Sharks, then you're just never going to be able to get into the offensive zone and start to get possession, right? So I'm not encouraged from that side of things. I think that unless they make some major changes in the defensive core, it changes in emphasis as to who they're going to play. That this, unfortunately, is just the way every game is going to be. It's going to be 40 shots on net, and depending on whether the Sharks can score, it'll be fun or not.
Yeah, well, and whether or not the goaltender can block those shots. And two quick thoughts before we hit the 3 stars, Ben. One, I liken this season to my favorite dodgeball quote, which was,
If you
"We
could
don't know
dodge
who our
a
best
wrench,
no, we don't know who our best player it is. It could literally be any one of us," which they said in the Vegas Cafe when they were challenged.
Yes.
The other thing I will say, and I was not expecting this, and I don't need a full paragraph take from you, Ben, but I immediately thought of you. Game 1, first game, Vegas, first game, Vegas. Keep that in mind. First power play. Sharks put 5 forwards on the ice.
Yes. Yes.
That's one of those moves that we haven't really seen a Sharks coach go, you know what? I'm gonna make a creative, smart, offensive just tactic. Rolled it out, and I was like, is this David Quinn?
Yeah,
he's got 5 forwards. Wow, and that early in the season, I was happy.
I it's not a terrible decision given
we have no defense.
The players available.
Yeah.
Though I still think you could make an argument that you could be doing 4-1 with Thrun and Benning as the 2 power play defense guys.
Well, Thrun can feed the puck offensively too, so he's perfect for that. Yeah.
Well, Benning, that's honestly that is also Benning's strength. We just don't see it very much because he's not given the opportunity. Weirdly, I'll give an example. Like, I was put in the position of feeling bad for Benning last night because he got no OT time. He played such a good game, and they put fucking Rutta out there in 3-on-3. Are you kidding me? That guy can't move. What are you doing?
Well, do you think they got a call from Greer? And Greer was like, hey, guys, we need you to lose in regulation. You already made it to overtime. Let's just take the one. Let's just take the one and walk away.
Sure. Yes. That's definitely what happened.
It was a weird call.
Anyway, that's my feeling on that is it's great. It's a great idea. It's the only way the Sharks are probably going to score anything on the power play this year. So give me more. They're also probably going to give up a lot of opportunities against their poor goalie that way as well. So fun times.
3 stars of the week.
3 stars. So I'm going to go Bordelot for his first NHL goal. Then I'm going to go Zadina 2nd star for his general play and first Sharks goal. And then obviously you can't not give the first star to Blackwood. First of all, because he's got 50 puck-sized dents in him. And second of all, because he stopped 49 of those in whatever the regulation. That's the word.
No, I agree. I'm actually gonna add a half star to that, or tie for 3rd or 2nd, or wherever you want to put him. But I'm gonna give a little acknowledgement to Eklund. Otherwise, mine's exactly the same as yours, and that's mainly because even though Eklund didn't necessarily get on the score sheet, Eklund came out the gate playing the way I was hoping he would play.
Yeah,
and I'm very encouraged by that because again, he looks like he's got composure there, and I can already see him becoming a very good player. If you asked me last year, I would say hope. I hope he is. Now I look at him and I go, I'm pretty confident
he could have 2 or 3 assists.
Right.
Like if he was passing to somebody who can finish.
Right.
He'd have 2 or 3 assists. So
Luke Kunin is not on your. He's not one of your stars.
I think I've done enough. You
get an angry phone call.
Cunnin.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, folks. Sharks have some games coming up, as they will until the end of the season. As we mentioned, next week they take on the Carolina Hurricanes, and then they take on the Boston Bruins, and then they take on the Nashville Predators. Where are they in the standings? Well, the standings don't really matter this early in the hockey season, but let's give them to you anyway. Sharks are currently sitting at 5th in their division. Right below them are the Seattle Kraken, who have played 1 more game but have lost 2 and tied 1. And then above them are the Los Angeles Kings, who pretty much have had the same outcome that the Sharks have, although with different shot disparity totals there. And then Western Conference, Sharks are sitting at 13th out of 16.
Woo-hoo!
Not as bad as your Stanley Cup favorites in the offseason to some weird people, Edmonton Oilers, who are 0-2. Let's just squeeze McDavid off that roster if we can, please, folks. Yeah, that's where the Sharks are.
Ooh. Oh, go ahead. McDavid for Blackwood, straight up. Let's go. Who says no?
Oh, I don't say no at all. I think McDavid could probably play goaltender just as well as Blackwood. Bedard probably could too, with the way Bedard's like. Yeah, actually, if we should talk about one player right now, not on the Sharks, who just probably deserves an honorary star, it's probably Austin Matthews.
Yeah,
he's 2 hat tricks, right, so far.
Just incredible player.
Yeah. Hey, maybe he'll want to retire here when he's old and probably not good anymore, because people really latch onto that San Ramon connection, even though not really. At the end of the day. Listen, that concludes this week's podcast and Sharks Play. You can, of course, check us out. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast. The Apple Podcast app, for example. Android people, big shrug to you. I've been doing it for like 7 or 8 years now. Going to keep doing it. You can always go to Spotify, though, but I didn't say that because I don't like to help you. You can, of course, check us, Ben, out on Twitter X thing, or X Twitter, at Circling the Cup. We do have our Facebook, which is, we answer questions there. It's facebook.com/Circling the Cup. And of course on the web at circlingthecup.com. We will be back soon. Hey, the Sharks are actually giving us stuff to talk about this season as opposed to last season. So we'll see if we're a little more regular than we were last year. And hopefully we will have Colin back with us. I secretly think Colin's been auditioning to be Brody's co-host, or was before, and that's why we hadn't really weren't able to get him this time around. But can't wait to hear his thoughts on some of these players as well. Ben, that's it, man. Another good week. Looking forward to another interesting week. Looking forward to another interesting week of Sharks hockey. Say bye-bye.
All losses. Let's go.
Bye-bye. That was a good one.